Imagine waking up in your bed, seeing the sun has just risen, slowly uncovering your goat wool blanket as you sit up, rubbing your eyes, and suddenly realizing you've awakened as a merchant in the Middle Ages. How wealthy would you become? Picture this. You open your eyes in the year 1280. On your head is a hat typical of the era's merchants. Your clothes are fine silk, your feet in leather sandals, a purse of gold in your hand. And before you stretches the bustling market of Florence. Should you buy land, a mansion in the city, or establish a vineyard in a distant village? But there was no such thing as property back then. I can almost hear you say, that's where you're wrong. And this misconception is one of history's greatest misunderstandings. In reality, the Middle Ages was a golden era where real estate investments quietly exploded, and the wealthy multiplied their fortunes through stone and soil. In this video, we'll explore together how property ownership emerged in this seemingly dark age, who the millionaires were, and how the foundations of today's real estate market were laid. Hello, friends. This is the Finance Sector channel. Welcome to all of you. From time to time, I tell the story of how money and finance have evolved throughout history, with forgotten tales and striking facts. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss this fascinating journey. Today's guest, property ownership and investments in the Middle Ages. Many associate this with the 19th, 18th, or even 17th centuries, but they're all wrong. This story begins right in the heart of the Middle Ages, in a world of knights, merchants, and kings. Are you ready? Hop on the time machine, because misty castles and chests full of gold await us. When you think of the Middle Ages, what comes to mind? Dark streets, wars, plagues, armored knights, and perhaps endless stagnation? For many years, numerous historians thought the same. But in the last 30 years, thanks to archaeological digs and documents unearthed, this view has completely changed. Contrary to popular belief, the Middle Ages was actually an incredible period of social and economic progress. Trade routes expanded, cities grew rapidly, and yes, the real estate market was booming. Wealthy merchants, nobles, and royal officials secured themselves and their descendants by purchasing property. These investments were so solid that they formed one of history's most resilient real estate markets. For example, in 12th century England, London's wealthy merchants were snapping up lands along the Thames River, just like today's real estate investors. So, in medieval Europe, did everything belong to the king? In theory, yes, all land belonged to the monarch. But in practice, things weren't that simple. Kings would lease lands to lords and vassals, but those lords managed the properties as if they were their own. If a king tried to seize a lord's land without cause, the lords would rebel. This balance created an interesting social dynamic. Imagine King John of England, forced to sign the Magna Carta if he unjustly seized a lord's land. Other lords would immediately think, are we next? This fear restrained kings. A historical example. In 1215, the Magna Carta was born precisely for this reason, to protect lords' property rights and somewhat limit the king's power. Lords, in turn, rented their lands to peasants. These peasants were protected by the king's laws against arbitrary evictions. Lords couldn't just take the land from their tenant peasants. Of course, how well laws were enforced is debatable, but at least there was an agreement. If a lord broke the rules, the king could use it as an opportunity to seize his rights. But was it just laws that protected property? No, the wealthy middle class, the bourgeoisie of merchants and artisans, could form their own private militias. This forced lords to be more cautious. As a result, many medieval cities gained incredible autonomy. For instance, 13th century Italian city-states like Florence were governed independently of distant nobles. Technically, the land might belong to a noble, but in practice, city dwellers set their own rules and integrated into the system. Just like today, pay your taxes, fulfill your obligations, don't break the laws, and your private property stays safe. But note, these privileges applied only to those with money or nobility. For serfs or poor peasants, property ownership was a pipe dream. Their life was a struggle for survival and basic sustenance. Now, let's turn our eyes eastward. How did property work in medieval China? Here, Concepts like Chengu, subsoil rights, and Chempi, surface rights, came into play. Chengu owners, the true landowners, paid taxes to the state and proved ownership with official documents, but they couldn't use the land themselves. Instead, Chempi owners, tenants, paid a fixed rent to farm it. This system peaked during the Song dynasty, 10th to 13th centuries. For example, wealthy landowners in the Yangtze River Valley rented out rice fields to tenants and lived luxuriously on rental income. What was different? Unlike today, landowners were required to rent out the land. They couldn't farm it themselves. Tenants had incredible rights. They could transfer their rights or sublet without informing the owner, like modern subcontracting. Plus, no upfront payments or deposits. This was one of the fairest rental systems of the era and boosted agricultural production. Thanks to this structure in the Song period, China's economy entered a golden age. Population exploded, trade volume soared. And what about the Islamic world? Sharia law recognized individual property rights and had advanced rules protecting inheritance, investment, and financial contracts. This was one of the most progressive systems of the time. But in practice, it resembled feudal Europe. With the Iqta system, sultans assigned lands to Muqta administrators. They collected taxes and managed local armies. In theory, they were state officials, but in reality, they acted like feudal lords. Rights became hereditary. They took extra rent from peasants and lived in luxury. A historical example. In the early Ottoman Empire, 14th to 15th centuries, the Timar system, a variant of Iqta, worked similarly. A Sipahi, similar to a Muqta, managed land in the Balkans and pocketed taxes. In return, he provided militias to the empire in wartime and commanded them. But under Sharia's influence, inheritance rules were strict. For instance, daughters had to inherit a rare quality in Europe. According to Sharia, sons received 2 shares and daughters 1 each. At first glance, this seems unequal, but the reason was that sons were actively involved in farming and managing the property. Now, the most curious part, who invested in property in the Middle Ages? It all depended on wealth and status. Poor servants or serfs. No, investment was a dream for them. But if you were a free man, you could take up a trade, engage in commerce, even by distant lands. For example, in 14th century Venice, a merchant would buy islands in the Mediterranean and establish olive groves. But property was expensive. Most preferred renting. Nobles? They were at the top, with both wealth and influence. A lord wouldn't just own a rural manor and urban mansion. He'd expand them through investment. In France, 12th century Norman dukes multiplied their holdings through conquests in England. How did property transfers work? In most places, it was a private agreement between buyer and seller. But in rural Europe, an extra step. Local lord approval was required. And of course, the lord wouldn't miss the chance to charge a fee. If you were a noble, the approval chain went up to the king. This increased bureaucracy, but enlivened the market. For example, in 13th century Germany within the Holy Roman Empire, property sales were so intense that a new urban elite emerged, merchants rivaling nobles. Conclusion? Medieval property ownership, though restricted in appearance, created a vibrant market. The wealthy bought and sold property, transforming society. This planted the seeds of modern capitalism. Think of today's real estate giants. Who wouldn't want to buy mansions wherever they like, farmhouses wherever, land wherever, and live off rent without working? Who knows? Maybe we're the slaves of the modern world. If you enjoyed this topic and it changed your perspective, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. You'll find many financial stories here. See you in the next one. Goodbye.